This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome you all once again to Webic Care 2020. Today we are going to discuss on diagnosis and management of severe asthma. So we have speaker Dr. Mohammad Juhaib. Dr. Mohammad Juhaib is a pulmonary and critical care consultant at Clear Medi Radiant Hospital, Mysuru. He is also working for Impact team. So I request Dr. Juhaib to proceed for the diagnosis and management of severe asthma, and at the end of the talk we will have a discussion. Juhaib, please proceed.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Raghunath sir, for encouraging me to give a talk. Talking about asthma, asthma is a very common disease with very high prevalence. Globally, the prevalence of asthma is around 350 million worldwide and accounting for around 0.4 million deaths each year. Okay, so in India, the prevalence of asthma ranges from 4 to 10%, and globally, the incidence from various countries varies from 2% to 21%. With industrialization and increased traveling, biomass fuel exposure, the prevalence of asthma is increasing. Not only the problem with the asthma is its stigma associated with it. Most of the patient doesn't like to be diagnosed with asthma. They like to be called it as a allergic asthma, but it is allergic asthma and allergic bronchitis and asthma are two different terminologies, which we'll be talking about later. Okay, so how do we define what asthma exactly is? Asthma is a heterogeneous disease and it is characterized by chronic inflammation. What heterogeneous term means? The heterogeneous term means the age group of starting of the disease varies. Sometimes it starts at very early age group of as less as 1 month of age. Yes, also in elderly, the severity also varies. The characteristic of the disease in each individual is variable. So that's why it is an heterogeneous disease. It behaves and presents variably. Second, it is characterized by chronic airway inflammation. There is persistent airway inflammation, whether the patient has a symptom or not, there will be a chronic airway inflammation in the airways. That's the reason why we have to take persistent inhalers or medications despite we don't have any symptoms. And it is defined by two things. One, with the help of the history of wheezing, breathlessness, cough and chest tightness, added together with variable airflow limitation, which is very important. Okay, so to start again, diagnosis of asthma is by two things. One is by history, which has the symptoms of any person coming with history of wheezing, breathlessness, cough and chest tightness. And on pulmonary function test, it shows variable airflow limitation. Okay, so coming on to algorithm, how to diagnose about asthma is, one, patient who has a respiratory symptoms with typical history of wheezing, breathlessness, cough and chest tightness, which recurrently happens. Okay, we have to take first a detailed history to know about the symptoms, followed by, if there is no symptoms, then you have to think for an alternative diagnosis. Okay, if there are symptoms purely suggest of asthma and there is a clinical urgency and the diagnosis of other things are unlikely, then we can empirically start them on treatment. Okay, then if to further confirm the diagnosis, we do something called as a spirometry or peak expiratory flow rate measurement, and also check for the reversibility. Okay. In peak expiratory flow rate limitation and spirometry, we see for a reversibility. Once it shows a reversible airway disease, FEV1 and FVC changes of more than 12% or more than 200 ml, then we diagnose an asthma. So the diagnosis of asthma is very simple, one based on history and second based on pulmonary function test. Okay, so in my talk I'll be talking a little bit of pulmonary aspects, and that will contribute around 25% of my talk, And 74% of my talk will be based on critical care aspects and how to deal with asthma. Because we need to get some knowledge about the basics of asthma, what an internal medicine guy or a pulmonologist go through while diagnosing and how he manages in outpatient department, and then in critical care aspects, emergency aspect of the asthma. Okay. So this is our asthma plan, how we go around with a patient who is diagnosed with an asthma. This is usually this protocol we follow in age more than 12 years. First, any patient with asthma, we follow an asthma management plan. First, we diagnose asthma, then we assess his severity based on questionnaires. Asthma control test will be followed, which we ask about the daytime symptoms, nighttime symptoms, and comorbidities, what he is, how his requirement of inhalers and other things. Okay. Then symptom control. Also, we look out for comorbidities like allergic rhinitis, any underlying GERD, sleep apnea, mental diseases, etc., which contributes to the severity of disease. Then once we diagnose, then we start him on inhaler therapies, and we ask for try to reach the practical goals by reducing the symptoms, reducing the exacerbation, reducing the side effects, and improving his lung function to normal lung function, and so that patient is able to live comfortably. So depending upon the symptoms, we classify the patients based upon the treatment of step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 5, and gradually uptitrate and downtitrate the medications depending upon his asthma control test. Okay. Most importantly, this is the GINA guideline. The recent changes or recent 2-year changes, what we can say is, now we are not using regularly SABA treatment or routine Asthaline or Duolin inhalers for asthma. Okay, it is reserved for COPDs only. In asthma, we give combination of formoterol with inhaled corticosteroids. Fine. So SABAs are almost relieved as a treatment. So treatment of asthma consists of 2 things. One is a controller. Controller is always inhaled corticosteroids. Sometimes it will be leukotriene receptor antagonist, and reliever is usually beta 2 agonist. Beta 2 agonist, there are various beta 2 agonists commonly used are salmeterol or formoterol. Okay. This step 3, step 4, and step 5 asthma are usually uncontrolled asthma. So this is how we go around for the treatment of asthma. Okay, this is our goal. One is reduction of the symptoms and risk reduction, so that the patient doesn't land up in exacerbation. What is an exacerbation? Means worsening of the symptoms which is beyond day to day to his initial asthma control. Okay, so if we coming on to few terminologies, what is uncontrolled asthma, what is difficult asthma, and what is severe asthma? See, uncontrolled asthma could be any patient who has very mild asthma and he flares up his symptoms. Okay, even patient who is on step 1, step 2 treatment can have an exacerbation, that is increase in the symptoms which is beyond to his day-to-day activity. For them, we call it as an uncontrolled asthma, which settles down with treatment and they'll be discharged. Yeah, the difficult to treat asthma and severe asthma are usually talked simultaneously, but there is definitely a difference. Okay, difficult asthma, asthma which is uncontrolled, described despite prescribing high dose of preventive treatment. Okay, what exactly means difficult is the patient is not difficult, but his compliance, one, it could be due to incorrect diagnosis or incorrect treatment or incorrect adherence to the therapy, or patients' comorbidities are not very well addressed. So that patients of stage 4 and stage 5 treatment who are not very well controlled because of the various reasons like diagnosis or incorrect inhaler treatment or bad adherence or not controlled comorbidities are called as a difficult to treat asthma. So now severe asthma is what we are interested in. Severe asthma is uncontrolled asthma despite maximal optimization of the treatment, and it worsens despite correct treatment. He is still having symptoms. Okay, so correctly I will show you what exactly that means. So these are the patients when if there are 100 patients, if you are saying Out of it, 24% of the patients, what we see, will be on step 4 and step 5. Step 4 is moderate ICS and LABA combination. Step 5 is high dose of ICS and LABA combination, plus or minus oral corticosteroids, immunoglobulin therapy, etc. and etc. Okay. Difficult to treat asthma, that means they are in step 4 and step 5 treatment, but they are not adherent to therapy or not using inhalers correctly, or their comorbidities are not very well addressed. They contribute to 17% of the patients. Okay, and 3.75% of the patients, they are on GINA step 4, step 5 treatment. With they're taking medications correctly, adherence is good, comorbidities are addressed, everything is fine, but still they have uncontrolled symptoms. Okay. So this is being detailedly dealt in Global Initiative of Asthma. There is a GINA guideline for diagnosis and management of severe asthma. I'll be talking a few bits and moments about this guideline in short, because the major aspect I'll be talking, as I said, is about the critical care aspect of the asthma. Okay. First, difficult to treat asthma. One, very importantly, we confirm the diagnosis. When this patient of asthma comes to diagnosis who has a difficult or severe asthma, we always have to confirm whether this is asthma or something else. Mind you, many things we miss. Obviously, one, definitely COPD. Second, diastolic dysfunction, very closely behave like this. Third, whether the patient is malingering. Fourth, vocal cord dysfunction. Fifth, malignancy. Sixth, thoracic tumors, intratracheal tumors, etc. and etc. all behave like asthma. Certain autoimmune diseases like Churg-Strauss syndrome, autoimmune vasculitis also can behave like an asthma clinically. Okay, so confirm the diagnosis. Once the diagnosis is confirmed with the help of pulmonary function test, look for the factors contributing to the severity of the illness. Whether the patient is also a smoker, we have to ask him to quit smoking, his industrial exposure, his allergen exposure, everything which are contributing to the severity of the disease. Second, whether his comorbidities are addressed, whether his allergic rhinitis, whether his GERD, whether his obesity, whether his depression, these things will always address. This also contributes to the severity of asthma. So we'll optimize the management, and then we'll review the patient every 3 months to 6 months if it is controlled. Okay. Once the symptoms are still controlling, then we go and do something called as severe asthma phenotypes. I will be talking about the severe asthma phenotypes subsequently, and then considering non-biological treatment, biological treatment and non-biological treatment. Exactly, I'll be coming to subsequent slides. Okay. So severe asthma phenotypes. There are two types. Earlier, there were only two types of asthmas. One is early onset asthma, second late onset asthma, and most of them were dumped as a COPD component. Fine. Now, asthma has multiple phenotypes which help us to modify the treatment exactly depending upon the behavior of the patients. Okay. So, type 2 mediated response and non-type 2 mediated response. It is basically depending upon that. One, early onset asthma, late onset asthma. Third one is eosinophilic predominant asthma. Okay. And non-type 2, one is obesity predominant asthma and neutrophilic predominant asthma. Okay. They are further sub-classified. So in this asthma chart, it is further very well mentioned. Severe uncontrolled asthma, we assess for the phenotypes depending upon the things. We check for the atopy, IgE levels, FeNO levels, blood eosinophil levels, and sputum eosinophil more than 2%. If it is an allergic predominant asthma, omalizumab with oral corticosteroids are preferred in severe asthmas. Eosinophilic predominant asthma, interleukin 5 mepolizumab is used with oral corticosteroids. Certain times interleukin 4 receptor antagonist has also been come up, called as a dupilumab, which we'll use. And eosinophilic predominant and allergic eosinophilic overlap, we use combination of the therapy. And very commonly we are seeing nowadays in Indian subcontinent is allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis or allergic bronchopulmonary mycosis, which we treat with the help of oral corticosteroids and antifungals, usually voriconazole with steroids, tapering doses once it gets controlled. Okay. And Th2 non-Th2 mediated response, neutrophilic asthma, commonly seen in smokers. Okay. They are very resistant. Importantly, they behave like a COPD, asthma COPD overlap. eosinophil levels are less, and then importantly, they are steroid resistant. Even if you increase the dose of steroids in general asthma, inhaled steroids, what I mean, they will start responding. But this neutrophilic asthma, they are resistant asthma. Usually we use medications which reduces the steroid resistance, like doxepalins and omnocortil. We use certain medications to reduce resistance to corticosteroids. Second, next is obesity-related asthma. Obesity-related asthma, usually asthma worsens with obesity in these cases, and usually with help of bariatric surgeries or weight reduction surgeries, asthma gets into very good control. And the last group is paucigranulocyte asthma, which is also a resistant asthma, may require for further treatment in severe asthma. These patients might be subjected for bronchothermoplasty also. Okay, so this is the pulmonary aspect of asthma, what usually goes in the OPD, and I have just briefly mentioned all the things, what happens, how we go about severe asthma in OPD, outpatient department. Now coming on to intensive care aspect of the patient, see this, I'll give you a case scenario where a 40-year-old gentleman is obese, 100 kg, smokes occasional cigarettes, comes to an emergency department with complaints of wheezing and breathlessness his past 3 days, worsening since 1 day with a past history of asthma. Remember, he is on irregular treatment and he is taking just aspirin tablets and deriphyllin tablets. As I mentioned, the GINA has outrightly told not to use aspirin or oral tablets or deriphyllin tablets in the management of asthma, because these patients usually go to severe asthma later stage and they will be very refractory to the treatment. Okay, this patient was on aspirin tablets and deriphyllin tablets. He also in the past required hospitalization and also required ventilatory support. So when you examine him in emergency, he's diaphoretic, he's tachypneic, tachycardic, and he is unable to speak in sentence. Okay, his room air saturation is 81%, heart rate is around 140, respiratory rate is 35 per minute, blood pressure is 170. Chest auscultation, bilaterally rhonchi, and there is decreased breath sounds. So this is the classical case, which is a messed up case, we can say. So all the risk factors for severe asthma are present. He is overweight, he smokes, and he is not very regular on treatment. The treatment what he takes is incomplete, and he also has a past history of ICU requirement also. And also on examination, his tachypneic, his saturations have fallen, which is very dangerous, and heart rate has increased. And on auscultation, it is also been written that he has decreased breath sound. What we immediately do is we check for the ABG. ABG shows pH of 7.48, PCO2 is 26, PO2 is 250, and lactates of 1.24. So what are the signs of severe asthma? What we see historically, it is one thing, definitely when patient comes, we have to see whether there is a risk factors for previous intubation, whether he had got intubated previously. So that patients are more likely to get intubated subsequently. And history of frequent admissions to the ER or hospital requirement is also one of the important factor which we have to note. Patients who come frequently are one of the patients who behave very badly later on also. So in examination, we could see for agitation, or patient is delirious, that tells that he is hypoxic, or CO2 has also built up, air hunger, use of accessory muscles. Silent chest is one of the diagnostic marker. Most of the time we keep a step and we don't hear anything. So, and we send the patient thinking that might be our step is wrong or we are not able to hear anything. So that is one of the things which, when there is a severe bronchospasm, there will be no air entry. Initially, there will be a partial bronchospasm where we can hear a rhonchi. Okay, when it goes to very severity, then there will be absent breath sounds at all. So this is the one thing we have to keep in mind, definitely. And we should always try to talk to patients so that we could assess whether he is able to speak or not. If he is able to complete one word, one sentence, or whatever it is, that even tells about the severity of the disease. So if he is not able to complete even a single word, or not even able to complete a single sentence, then the asthma is severe in ER. Okay, and also look for pulsus paradox, that is inspiration and expiration variability in the heart rate and blood pressure. Okay, usually the heart rate drop of around 120 is also very dangerous. Okay, mind you, importantly, this patient also had drop in saturation, which is a bad marker, because asthma people hyperventilate, the oxygen saturation should go up. When patient is in severe asthma where there is a severe bronchospasm, drop in saturation is a very bad marker. And if we also see his previous pulmonary function test, if it is less than 1 liter, they are more susceptible for having an exacerbation. ABG data showing hypercapnia or respiratory acidosis is a good reliable marker that patient will deteriorate. Okay, early recognition is very important, and timely intervention is very, very important to relieve the bronchospasm. Okay, so assessment of risk factors for poor outcome. Okay, these are the factors which are usually associated with poor outcomes. Are this ever, if he has been ever intubated for asthma, uncontrolled asthma symptoms, having more than one exacerbation, pulmonary function test FEV1 less than 1 liter or FAC less than 1.5 liter, or incorrect inhaler technique and poor adherence, asthmatics who are smoking, elevated FeNO levels more than 50, especially seen in allergic asthmas, patient who is obese, pregnancy, and high blood eosinophilia levels more than 1000. Okay, risk factors which are associated with fixed airflow inflammation, fixed airflow limitation, that is, they start behaving like a COPD. Patients who are asthmatics who are not on ICS therapy, that means inhaled corticosteroids is a crime nowadays. Patients who are a smoker, who are occupational exposure to various dust, smoke, and fumes, mucous hypersecretion, and blood eosinophilia, the risk factors for fixed airflow limitation, they start behaving and they may go into asthma COPD overlap syndrome. Okay, and medication side effects, oral corticosteroid abuse is also highly seen in certain group of patients, especially with severe asthma. They develop muscle fatigue, myopathy, and osteoarthritis, hypertension, diabetes, cardiac diseases, volume overload state, and present in very bad state. Okay. Investigations usually when they come to emergency, full set of complete blood tests, counts, renal function test, ECG, chest X-ray, ABG, viral PCR for nasal swabs. Nowadays, sending coronavirus is also a trigger for asthma, and influenza was also a common trigger for asthma. Other virus, respiratory syncytial virus, adenovirus, etc., are also a trigger for asthma. Procalcitonin, 2-deaco, BNP, and TROPI to rule out any cardiac diseases. Okay. Most importantly, asthma is usually inflammatory exacerbations. Usually, bacterial infections doesn't play a role, though sometimes they can cause exacerbation of asthma, not routinely. Fine. So this patient, first patient we have to see, always see into, anywhere in emergency, always check for airway, breathing, circulation. So patient is put on nebulized treatment, levosalbutamol continuously with ipratropium continuously. One there every 20 minutes. One there is intermittent therapy, another is continuous therapy. Continuously putting 3 residuals of salbutamol with ipratropium over 1 hour is seen to be slightly superior than giving intermittent therapy. Immediately glucose, corticosteroids, prednisolone or methylprednisolone or hydrocort, whatever you use, or dexamethasone, whatever you use, immediate hydrocort or corticosteroid should be used. Okay, steroids are earlier used, better outcome and less chances of relapse. So faster we treat the exacerbation, faster we try to reverse, it is better it is. Okay. So we have to check how is the response, whether response is good clinical response or no clinical response. If good clinical response, continue inhalers regularly. If patient has come back to normal, you can even discharge him. If there is no clinical response, usage of magnesium is also prescribed in GMAP. 2 grams in 100 ml NS over 20 minutes can give up to maximum 4 grams. Okay. Then see if there is a good response to treatment or not. If there is a good response to treatment after giving magnesium, still patient is having breathlessness, then better to admit him in ICU. Okay. If still there is some clinical response has come, better to keep him in observation. Most importantly, use levosalbutamol. The dosage is 2.5 mg. Giving 3 doses together, the dosage comes approximately to 10 mg to 15 mg over 1 hour, along with short-acting muscarinic antagonist ipratropium. So here, importantly, PC deriphyllin is not being given nowadays. It should not be used in acute exacerbation of asthma in outpatient basis because of its own cardiac risk. Okay. So first line treatment: oxygen, nebulized beta-2 agonists, nebulized anticholinergics, and hydrocortisone. Hydrocortisone or corticosteroids has two mechanisms of action. One is by nuclear pathway it acts on the reduction of the cytokines, which has a delayed response, and immediate response, which acts immediately, is membrane stabilization, reduction in inflammation, and also acts as an agonist to the actions of bronchodilators. Okay. Second therapy is, which should not be tried in is magnesium and helium and oxygen. Okay. So antibiotics are strictly should not be routinely used unless and until we have an evidence of any infection. Okay. So we have to check for the trigger for asthma. What is the reason why he has trigger? Whether it is an infection, whether there is whether he has not taken medications, or what is the trigger exactly. Okay. So again, before, if the patient doesn't respond, always rethink whether our diagnosis is correct or not. Whether we are dealing with any eosinophilic granulomatous diseases, whether the patient is an ABPA patient, whether patient has a small vessel vasculitis, whether patient is on aspirin or beta blocker, always reconfirm the diagnosis. Okay. I'll be talking few things: what is brittle asthma and what is status asthmaticus. Okay, these are both of the terms are absolute terms which are not being commonly utilized. Okay, these are before 1990. These terms are commonly used. Brittle asthma, there are two types of brittle asthma. One is called as a type 1 brittle asthma. Second one is type 2 brittle asthma, obviously. Type 1 brittle asthma, there is huge fluctuation of peak expiratory flow rate of more than 40% every day for more than 15 days or more than 50% of the time. That is, peak expiratory flow rate in the morning is 500 and suddenly it drops down to 250. He has a severe asthmatic attack. So this is called as brittle asthma. Type 2, in the background, the patient will be very fine. Years together, he will not have any asthmatic attack or any attack at all. Suddenly, he develops a severe asthma. It usually responds to adrenaline. Okay. So type 2 asthma, drug of choice is adrenaline. This type of brittle asthmas we see rarely. Type 2 asthma, brittle asthma is usually associated with food allergies. What is it say? Okay. So status asthmaticus is also an outdated terminology. So all severe acute asthmas, by definition of previously, when they are compared, they are status asthmaticus. Those whose peak expiratory flow rate is less than 33%. Okay. So coming on to the case scenario, despite we have initiated intravenous steroids, nebulized SABA, SAMA, intravenous magnesium, patient shows no improvement, no symptomatic improvement, and ABG shows pH of 7.35, PCO2 of 40, PO2 of 60, and lactate of 3.5. Okay, this ABG is very important. So though, mind you, the ABG looks very much normal, but very important thing to consider is PCO2, which is normal, is a very bad marker. Remember, asthmatics hyperventilate. So normally PCO2 should be less. Okay, PCO2, even if it is a normal in patients who are having severe asthmatic attack, tells that patient is going into a muscle fatigue. Okay, and lactate levels of 3.5 also indirectly tells that patient is going into a muscle fatigue. So this becomes an indication to admit the patient in ICU may require ventilatory support. So how to delay ventilatory support? Which patients we see for ICU admission is lack of response to initial medical management, worsening of respiratory distress, deterioration of peak expiratory flow rate, worsening oxygenation, respiratory fatigue, even with the normal CO2 or rising CO2, and patients who have been previously mechanical ventilated and are also anticipated to have another need of mechanical ventilation. Okay. During the therapy of acute, initially in emergency, if patient shows any impending respiratory arrest from fatigue, altered sensorium, cardiac arrest, or respiratory arrest, straight away patient should be ventilated and intubated and ventilated in ER and shifted to emergency department. Okay. So how can we delay intubation? One is with the help of NIV. NIV is not very well proven in asthma exacerbations. A special phenotype groups patients who are obese, neutrophilic predominant asthma, who behaves a little bit of like a COPD or paucigranular asthmatics. In some subgroups, only in that subgroups, NIV has been used. So still the studies are not very, very clear in them. In general, asthmatics as such who are in severe exacerbations like eosinophilic predominant asthmas, the usage is very dicey. Okay, so how NIV helps? One, with the help of expiratory PEEP, it reduces work of breathing, and with the help of IPAP pressures, it reduces work of, it increases tidal volume and decreases work of breathing. Most importantly, when NIV is connected, give continuous nebulizations. NIV helps in delivery of drugs easily to the distal airways, because most of the time the drug doesn't reach to the distal airway where the pathology is taking place, because the patient will not be able to breathe. So with help of NIV, nebulize them so that the medications reaches to the distal area, which is the site of the bronchospasm. Okay. So other respiratory therapies, with what we see in patients who have been admitted in ward or ICUs, other respiratory therapies which we have used in patients is consider monoclonal antibodies. If patient is on omalizumab or mepolizumab who is nearing to the dose, that dose should be given to prevent him on to go into ventilatory support, whether it will help or delay the ventilatory requirement. Okay, many times, sometimes in 10 to 15% of the times they may respond. We also have used intravenous, nebulized adrenaline or subcutaneous adrenaline. Never, I have not used intravenous or intramuscular adrenaline much. Intramuscular adrenaline I have used, not intravenous adrenaline, for the sake of asthma. Intravenous glucagon. Glucagon is also a smooth muscle relaxant. Certain NEGM papers and certain PubMed papers suggest that use of glucagon, though the number of patients used, so number of patients that have been responded are very less, not a guaranteed treatment as per GNAT therapy. Nebulized magnesium, nebulized calcium channel blockers, inhaled HELOCs, intravenous ketamines, or other therapies have been tried with not much variable success rate. Okay. Other therapies, I think you might also see people giving nebulized clonidine, also intravenous deriphyllin, are not recommended as such routinely. Okay. So the patient, we are not able to, he is not, patient is still deteriorating and we need to intubate him. So patients with asthma are very critical. So better to have 2 operators, load them with fluid, use short-acting medications. Remember that after intubating, patient may go into severe bronchospasm because it has a ventilated tube which can even act as an irritant. Okay. So there will be, while intubation, be careful, be methodical, and always use bigger size endotracheal tube. Use short-acting agents, rapid sequence intubation, use ketamine or propofol, whatever is the sedation and muscle relaxant should always be tailored to the patient condition, always. Okay. So post-intubation ventilatory strategies, as I said, use larger tube as much as possible. Lowest FiO2 to reach saturation of around 90 to 92%. Always use lower tidal volumes, smaller respiratory rates of 10 to 12 breaths per minute. Use prolong the expiration time to 1:3 to 1:4, so that there is no dynamic airway response. Increase the inspiratory flow rate to the maximum. Reset the pressures, especially P-plat pressures. P-peak pressures are not currently not considered as very important thing. P-plat is very important thing, which we are seeing nowadays. Use of heavy sedation so that the patient initially for 24 hours completely sedate and paralyze the patient. Minimize the duration of blockade to 24 to 48 hours depending upon the patient requirement. Use of volume control mode of ventilation is suggested, but whatever is convenient to you, you have to use it. There is no definitive key. Ventilation is just a support, not a method of treatment. Ventilation should though plays a key role. Okay, and importantly, when patient is not triggering, use minimal P. Okay, and always try to keep P-plat less than 30 to prevent dynamic hyperinflation, and titrate P to work based on the patient trigger. Okay, if patient is triggering, PEEP is required. When patient is not triggering, use minimal PEEP. Okay, so sedation, use long-acting sedations like opioids and benzodiazepines, plus or minus propofol and ketamine. So few people prefer ketamine because it also propofol and ketamine because it also helps in bronchodilation also, and neuromuscular blockade for initial 24 to 48 hours. Let the patient be sedated and ventilated very well to prevent further bronchospastic episodes and to break bronchospastic episodes which are going on. Okay, so patient has been successfully intubated and being ventilated. Arrangements are made to connect him onto ventilator. So what is importantly we have to know is consequences of bronchospasm. One, risk of dynamic hyperinflation. What is dynamic hyperinflation? That is when the patient has severe bronchospasm, the airway gets narrowed, only the air gets inside, gets trapped, there will be a lot of air trapping and there will be no expiration at all. So this results in dynamic hyperinflation. This also results in lungs to expand and the flattened diaphragm is lost. Okay, the dome of the diaphragm is lost. As the result, diaphragm gets flattened, and the mechanics of respiration are altered, and deranged gas exchange. Importantly, not just the ventilation is distorted, but also the perfusion is distorted. Why? Because when there is a dynamic hyperinflation, it also compresses the uh, uh, vasculature which is beneath the alveoli. Okay, so there will be distortion of ventilation and perfusion with distorted mechanics of respiration. That is primarily diaphragm is affected because of the hyperinflation. Okay, as a result, there will be a drop in blood pressure and other things which can also happen because of the dynamic hyperinflation. So the objective of ventilator settings in acute severe asthma is to prevent breath stacking and to reduce hyperinflation. The key thing is to use low tidal volume, as I said, low respiratory rate, high flow rates, shorten the inspiratory time, and allow permissive hypercapnia to happen. Okay. So this is our patient. We have set the ventilator tidal volume of 6 to 8 liters, respiratory rate of 10 to 14 per minute, peak expiratory flow rate of 80 liters per minute, FiO2 of 100%, PEEP of 0, and trigger of 2 liters per minute. P-plat if it is less than 30, and pH. So how do we continue? We check for the P-plat. Okay, then if yes, P-plat is less, then and pH is also fine. That is FiO2 pH is 7.20, and we will continue the current settings. And if the P-plat pH is more than 7.20 and there is CO2 accumulation, slightly improve the respiratory rate and till P-plat reaches 30, and if so that the carbon dioxide gets washed off. Okay. And if P-plat is more than 30, then reduce the tidal volume to further. And most importantly, expiratory minute ventilation, which plays a main role. Try to reduce the expiratory minute ventilation less than 10 liters per minute, and then sedate and ventilate, and then check subsequently after an hour or two, check for P-plat. Okay, expiratory minute ventilation is a new concept which we have to always check. How much patient is expiring. Usually the target is less than 10 liters per minute. Better is less than 8 liters per minute. Always try to give physiological minute ventilation. Okay, and then P-plat less than 30 to be maintained. If it is maintained, then it is good. If no, then we have to rethink about we have to go for a more aggressive treatment of asthma. Okay, after a couple of hours, after our setting of ventilator, high pressure alarms starts off. Okay, check for the P-plat pressures. Okay, if we see there is the alarms are ringing now, so we check for a P-plat pressures. P-plat pressure is also high and peak airway pressures are also high. That means there is a compliance problem. Okay, so when there is a compliance problem, always check for pneumothorax. And second important thing is worsening of dynamic hyperinflation, which can cause with severe bronchospasm. So if there is a pneumothorax, go ahead with putting an ICD. And if there is increased in airway pressures or peak airway pressures are high with normal plateau pressures, think of things which increases the airway resistance. Okay, if it is just a dynamic hyperinflation, if there is also a drop in blood pressure, disconnect the patient and manually ventilate the patient. Okay, check for evaluate for things which can cause worsening bronchospasm. Check for ET tube blockade, ET tube kinking. Okay. Okay, now patient had this. Suddenly, we did not solve the problem. Patient, he develops an hypertension, worsening hypoxia, and rapidly deteriorates. Patient had a pulseless electrical activity. Okay, so what might have caused this? One, most commonly dynamic hyperinflation, so which can be relieved. Next, look for the tension pneumothorax, and importantly, positive pressure ventilation creates imbalance in heart-lung interactions, adding on the sedation, which can cause hypotension and vasodilatation and pre-existing hypovolemia. Patient may go into hypertension, may go into cardiac arrest. Always check for 5H and 5Ts. Immediately start ACLS protocol. Mechanically ventilate the patient. So always the important is check for dynamic hyperinflation whenever there is pulseless electrical activity or asystole. Look for tension pneumothorax. Look for heart-lung interactions, whether we have hypoventilated the patient, whether the patient requires more fluid. Always correct 5H and 5Ts. The patient should be fine. Okay. So successfully we have resuscitated the patient. Now you notice that after resuscitating, patient is requiring high FiO2, patient is requiring 100% oxygenation, and still patient is not able to respond. The saturation is not picking up. So post intubation, what do you think of it? One, whether you have intubated correctly or not. Okay, whether the tube is in right main stem intubation, endotracheal tube displacement, endotracheal tube blockages. Mind you, asthmatics have a lot of mucus production, and the mucus is usually thick. Okay, they can even get settled in ET tube. So always check for the mucus pluggings, and if required, may require bronchoscopy also in such patients. Okay, check for pneumothorax. If there is an accidental esophageal intubation, relieve the gastric distension. Mechanical malfunction of ventilator should always be checked. Check for aspiration pneumonia, which might have accidentally happened, and worsening bronchospasm, as that always can anytime happen in asthmatics. So now this patient possibly had a dynamic hyperinflation. Patient has hypoxia improves with the therapy, and he continues to be DP sedated and paralyzed and mechanical ventilated. On performing inspiratory hold and expiratory hold, we record that the P peak is 80, P plat is 40, and intrinsic P puff around 18 centimeters. So what should be our target? How can we further add on to this patient? Okay, how does okay, what do we see in monitor is this. Okay, if we always carefully look the ventilator scalars, okay, flow volume curve, to look for the signs of air trapping. This in red marking is clearly showing that the patient has an air trapping. So whenever there is an air trapping, there is increase in FRC. So patient has volume trap, patient is hyperinflated. As the result, the P plat increases, the compliance of the lung increases, and simultaneously the P peak also goes down. Okay. So when the patient is having persistent high dynamic hyperinflation, how to reduce it? As I said initially, reduce expiratory minute ventilation. Okay, expiratory minute ventilation target to be less than 10 liters per minute. Okay, and reduce the tidal volume to 4 to 6 ml per minute. Reduce the respiratory rate as much as possible. Increase the expiratory time. Increase the reduce the tidal volume. Respiratory rate reduction can go as much as 8 to 10 liters per minute. Reduction of tidal volume as low as 4 ml per kg, and shorten the inspiratory time to allow greater time for exhalation to help to reduce dynamic exhalation. Okay. So importantly, how to check for dynamic hyperinflation is patient should be importantly very well sedated and paralyzed. Okay. If you after that press on the inspiratory hold button. Okay. Once you press on the inspiratory hold button, it will tell you about the auto P. sorry. Once you hold inspiratory hold the it will tell about the auto peak. When you do it in expiration, then it tells about the dynamic hyperinflation. Okay, after optimizing ventilatory strategy, there CO2 rises to 67, PO2 improves to 25, bicarb is normal. So expected, there are few contraindications where we don't have to do is for permissive hypercapnia is recent myocardial infarction, increase in intracranial pressure, and patient who are pregnant. Okay. So after aggressive bronchodilator therapy, patient persistent to have severe bronchospasm, and it is still difficult to ventilate. Okay. Other therapies which we, as I already told, we have discussed is which I have tried is ketamine infusion, bronchoscopic removal of impacted mucus flux, methylxanthines, using of aminophylline to improve the resistance to corticosteroid and a minimal effect of bronchodilators. Very rarely we have used subcutaneous beta-2 agonist, terbutaline injection, which was used initially. Okay, and very rarely we have used HELOX, inhaled general anesthesia, and ECMO also have been suggested. Okay. After 24 hours of aggressive bronchodilator therapy, we have optimized the mechanical ventilation patient. Patient bronchospasm has settled. He is in weaned off, planning to wean him off from the ventilatory support. Okay. He wakes up. Okay. So when should we extubate him? Okay. No. So weaning and extubation criteria should always be seen when patient is after 24 hours. There is no bronchospasm. Stop sedation. Allow the patient to wake up. Allow him to spontaneously breathe. Check for bronchospasm recurrently. PCO2 should be normal. Auto PEEP should be checked. It should be less than 10 centimeters of water. Look for flow volume graph and flow time graph if there is any dynamic hyperinflation. There should be no evidence of neuromuscular weakness. Check for readiness to wean, do spontaneous breathing trial, do readiness for extubation trial, and give a trial of extubation. And post extubation, always observe the patient for 24 to 48 hours in ICU. So in this patient, on attempting for a trial of spontaneous breathing into a respiratory distress, he needs to be placed on controlled mode of ventilation. So this patient recurrently goes into bronchospasm. So always have an eye on the patient always. Okay. What might be the reason for failure of weaning is patients persistently go into bronchospasm. Sometimes we have to directly extubate on the. Sometimes we have to directly extubate on NIV. Okay. Check for impaired respiratory mechanics, reassess for dynamic hyperinflation. Also importantly, check for cardiac dysfunctions. Patients may have comorbidities like cardiac failure, may have new onset MI, neuromuscular weakness, which quite happens because the patients will be on long-term steroids, and also patients are subjected to neuromuscular blockades. Electrolyte imbalance is very commonly seen because patients are continuously being nebulized with beta-2 agonist, which can cause hypokalemia. Steroid can cause electrolyte disturbances and metabolic and endocrine disturbances. Cognitive dysfunctions are very common because of the severity of the disease. Most of the patients may have cognitive dysfunctions, elderly age groups especially, and many psychological disturbances also. Okay, this might be the causes of failure to wean. Try to correct them. Okay. So, is there any role of ECMO if he fails to attempt weaning? So very few papers are there where ECMO has been used in patients who have very severe bronchial asthma as a last resort. Okay. So despite continuous maximal therapy, patient if it is hypercapnic and patient has developed bronchopleural fistulas, etc., consider for an ECMO or certain things. Okay. Okay. So coming on to COVID crisis, these are the certain guidelines which have been suggested by GINA this time. Okay, patients who are inhaled corticosteroids or on oral corticosteroids, patients have to continue with them, thinking them ongoing pandemic, reducing oral corticosteroids or inhaled corticosteroids could be dangerous. Inhaled corticosteroids are as such as safe in asthmatics. The dosage is very, very less. Always all the patients whoever you are discharging, have a written action plan, what to do, when to use reliever therapy, when to use controller therapy, using of short course of oral corticosteroids, and to seek medical helpline whenever possible. Okay, avoid using nebulizers, home nebulizers as much as possible. This can disseminate virus and not only to the patients, to others. Always use meter dose inhalers via spacer as a preferred treatment in most of the patients. Avoid using nebulizers in daily day-to-day activity. Okay, spirometry in this ongoing COVID crisis, spirometry should be avoided as much as possible because it helps. We don't know who are asymptomatic carriers. It can risk of spreading of infection to others. Okay, and follow strict infection control procedures if aerosol generation is required. Thank you.
Juhaib, it was a very excellent presentation. Actually, it is very difficult to cover most of the stuff in 1 hour duration, but you have tried to cover all the aspects. Thank you so much, Dr. Juhaib. Dr. Juhaib, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it was a really excellent talk. I think students have to go through your slides again and again because a lot of information is there in your slides. So they have to listen your talk once again and again. You have to go through the slides. That much of information is there. Thank you so much. A few questions here actually. What is the dose of magnesium when there is a severe bronchial asthma is there?
Sir, 2 gram in 100 ml NS over 20 minutes, sir. There is no only single stat dose, sir.
Only stat dose. So guidelines mention only
stat dose. No, there is no role of continuous using of magnesium, sir. Only stat dose magnesium is preferred, sir. And the role is also controversial, especially in pediatrics. It has some role. In adults, the response is not very great. Though we have seen some patients responding, still GINA continues to keep it in his guidelines.
Okay. The question is, if the patient is having severe bronchial asthma, had a broader trauma, pneumothorax, ICD has been placed. Now yes, patient is having deep bronchopleural fistula. How correct, to ventilate this patient, especially with the PEEP aspects?
Okay, sir, if patient is sedated well, okay, if patient is not triggering, okay, then keeping PEEP is of not much of a value. Okay, there are two school of thoughts. I am from one where patient, if it is completely paralyzed and sedated and not triggering, minimal PEEP is better, sir. Even zero PEEP is also been suggested. Okay, even patient is triggering, minimal PEEP of 5 is also okay, sir.
Okay. So you mean to say a minimal PEEP, as much as minimal PEEP is better when the bronchopleural fistula.
Yes, sir. Even patient having dynamic hyperinflation, high PEEP, keeping PEEP, like in COPDs, we keep PEEP 10, 12, or patients in ERDS, we keep PEEP 10, 12. In asthmatics, PEEP doesn't have much role, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Any other questions are there from the audience or listeners? Please, they can put in the chat box or they can unmute themselves and they ask question. There is another query here, Dr. Juhaib. Yes, you spoke about even COVID with asthma. That is very nice, actually. There is some questions regarding the interaction with the remdesivir with the dexamethasone. So they are suggesting remdesivir with the methylprednisolone option is better, combination is better. Is it so? What is your opinion on that?
Sir, currently there is no clear-cut say by any committee or a group, but few pharmacologists have said that there is interaction of betamethasone with remdesivir. It acts on the cytochrome P450, reduces the potency of remdesivir. Okay, so they are suggesting to use methylprednisolone instead of betamethasone or dexamethasone.
Okay, so methylprednisolone is better with remdesivir instead of dexamethasone. Correct. That is the message you want to give. Okay, okay. Yeah, I think there will be a lot of controversy will be there. we better we not discuss
Correct.
about COVID here because we don't know.
Yeah.
After 1 year only we are able to know which is better and which is not better. Thank you so
Correct,
much
sir.
for that, Vivek. There is another question actually. Yeah, 1 second. Okay, I know there is not a question actually. Yeah, Jihab, while managing these asthma patient, this steroid usage, when severe bronchial asthma is there, you told about steroids. How
Yes,
long
sir.
can you use steroids? Is it necessary to taper it or stop it suddenly?
Sir, usually short course of steroid is what is suggested, sir. Duration of short course varies from 5 to 14 days, sir. Prolonged steroid doesn't have any role. Short
7
course
to
of
14
steroid,
days.
so 5 to 14
Okay,
days, sir. Okay, shorter,
5 to 14.
longer dose doesn't have any much action. People usually now stop to 5 days only. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Whether they prefer orals versus IV steroids, which is better?
Depending upon the patient compliance, sir. If patient is comfortable with effective as IV steroids, sir. If patient is able to take orally, then oral steroids are okay, sir.
Okay, both oral steroids and IV steroids are efficacy is same. It depends on the
Correct.
patient complaints. How early we have to give steroids?
Sir, as early as possible. Maybe within 10 minutes if you give, it is also good, sir. Early steroids and early beta bronchodilators helps in early reliever. As long as we try to postpone the things may worsen. He may go to severe bronchospasm episodes.
Okay, okay. Many people use still this leukotriene antagonist. What in severe bronchial asthma? What is your message for that?
Sir,
Leukotriene
in
antagonist.
certain patients like certain phenotypes like asthmatics who are smokers, leukotriene receptors have been used very well, sir. They respond to leukotriene receptor antagonist. Even GINA tells as an add-on therapy, not as a main therapy, sir. In all asthmatics, we can use leukotriene receptors, but as a second line, not as a first line treatment.
Okay. I think Dr. Prakash want to ask one question. Dr. Prakash, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to know how to set this peak inspiratory flow rate on a ventilator in asthmatic patients as well as COPD patients. How exactly you set this one? Is there any parameter how much you have to set for this patient?
Sir, I think
Peak
currently most
inspiratory
of the
flow rate.
ventilators which we use are auto flow, sir. So we don't need to set. It is auto flow ventilators. So the flow is automatically delivered, sir. So currently sir, do you want to add something, sir?
No, I want to know. We prefer to give higher peak inspiratory flow rate 60 to 80 compared to the default setting. It is around 40 there. So I want to know that why.
Yeah, Prakash, I will try to answer for that. What is happening? You want to adjust flow rate. You have to reduce the inspirate time. In some ventilator, we can adjust directly the flow rate, like 60 liter per minute, 70 liter per minute, 80 liter per minute, something like that. In some ventilator, the directly adjusting flow rate is not possible. In that case, you have to reduce the inspirate time. The moment you reduce the inspirate time, the same tidal volume, example 500 ml, is given in a shorter duration with increased flow rate. So how to see exactly how much flow rate is delivering to the ventilator, that we have to check with the waveforms. The waveform peak inspiratory flow rate waveforms will be seen, and we can approximately make out that this much of flow rate is going to for this patient. And some ventilator usually it will show this much flow rate is already it's going on. So you can see the number or you can see the flow rate graph to know how much flow rate is going on. So when there is no flow rate adjustment is there in your ventilators, this can be done with the reducing inspiratory time.
Okay. And what is the dose of the adrenaline you give as a nebulization? Actually, for nebulization.
Adrenaline respules 1 in 10,000 will be there. 1 VR diluted in 2.5 ml NS. It should be used once.
One ampule, direct, yeah, with 2.5 ml. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
If there is no other questions, we'll end now. And I request Dr. Juhaib, so that we can utilize these slides for the students, and also this webinar recording will be put in the YouTube also. Juhaib.
yes, sir. Sure, sir. Well, I'll forward my slides to you, sir. And
Yeah.
to the group.
Thank you so much, Dr. Juhaib.
Thank you.
It was one of the excellent presentation covering most of the stuff in asthma. Thank you so much. I know this today, I think audience is less. Most of the time audience will be full, actually 30, 40 will be there. Nowadays, for the all people I'm talking, it is very difficult nowadays to conduct the webby critical care in the situation like COVID, and we are receiving a lot of patients. In spite of reducing frequency of the sessions, still it is becoming difficult. We'll have a talk on ARDS, then we'll take a call on even the frequency of webby critical care or content the webby critical care per se. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Juhaib, for
Thank
your
you, sir.
valuable time. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Same place. ಯಾಕೆ ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಕೇಳ್ತಿರಲ್ಲ ಒಳ್ಳೇದಾಯ್ತು ಬಿಡಿ ಸರ್